What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to the channel. Big Dog Brett. Thanks so much for tuning in. Today, we're going to be talking about the University of Georgia versus Tennessee, or Tennessee versus University of Georgia, however you want to look at it, today on the channel. And I can't wait to get into it. Lots to talk about. I think you guys are going to be excited for this show. Don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and share while you're here. And we're going to get into it right after this. All right, guys. First off, thank you guys so much for being here. Now is a great time to hit that like and subscribe button. We're going to get into some stuff here, and you might get distracted, so I'd like for you guys to go and do that now if you can. All right, so let's talk about it. Probably the biggest matchup of the year so far, Georgia versus Tennessee, and there is loads to talk about on both sides. And I'm going to try to be objective. It's going to come off as me being, if you don't like what I have to say, you're going to say I'm coming off as a Georgia homer, or you may say that I'm not giving Georgia enough credit, or I'm not giving Tennessee enough credit, or whatever it is you want to. I try to be objective as I can. I look at stats. I don't just look at emotion. I look into the very things that I think are going to make the biggest impact in these games, as well as what has happened so far for these teams throughout the season. So that having been said, let's go ahead and kind of jump into some of it. We have to look at these games that they have played so far across the schedule. Georgia's 8-0. Tennessee is 8-0. Georgia having played one more game than they have due to a bye week. This is going to be an absolute monster of a game played in Athens. It's not a night game. This is going to be a 3:30 game. Somehow it ended up not being a night game, which seems really weird considering the magnitude of this game. This is essentially a preseason. This is essentially a kind of mid-season playoff game. When you consider that both of these teams look very, very good this far in the season, Georgia is the defending national championship. Tennessee seemingly having come out of nowhere with one of the most prolific quarterbacks they've probably had in 20 years. Hendon Hooker looks phenomenal. He moves around well. He throws the ball well. He makes good decisions with the ball. He's a Heisman leading candidate caliber quarterback at this point. So, and they've got really good receivers. The question is can Georgia and Tennessee, either one, come to an advantage? So when you get into the stats and you look at the points per game, they're really close as far as who scores the most. But now that we're going to start getting into it, let's get into the defense of it, right? What a lot of people don't realize is that Tennessee actually has a pretty good running defense. They've done a really good job of stopping some really good offensive teams as far as the running game, Alabama being one of them. Now, since we're going to bring up Alabama, let's go ahead and talk about Alabama, and let's be as fair as we can. I am obviously not an Alabama fan. I'm obviously not a Tennessee fan. I'm a Georgia fan. But what I'm looking at is how much credit was Tennessee getting for beating Alabama. So if you guys look back, that game was extraordinarily close. It come down to a game-winning field goal there at the very end. But we would be remiss if we didn't talk about Alabama's performance. So who was actually the better team here, so to speak? So some might say that Alabama lost to Tennessee because Tennessee beat them. I think that any time that you set a historic amount of penalties in a game for your entire program, 139 yards worth of penalties, one of those penalties pulled back about a 30-yard run, and one of those penalties negated an interception in the end zone, which Alabama ended up scoring on. Those two, just those two in and of themselves, completely changed the course of that game. If Alabama played a little more disciplined, they would have been able to change the course of that game. A missed field goal did hurt them as well. Penalties that extended drives, a couple of turnovers, fumble I think was one of them, and just everything that could go wrong for Alabama went wrong. Everything that could go right for Tennessee did go right, and they were playing in Neyland Stadium, which was extraordinarily loud. Bryce Young seems to struggle in some of these louder road environments. So really, really interesting as to how that game played out. Now, in my opinion, those are two factors that you're not going to be able to count on in the Georgia-Tennessee game. It's played in Athens. Tennessee has only played in 2 road games all season. That's it. And one of those games against Pitt, they only won by 1 score in overtime. So there's a couple of games, I think 3 or 4 games this season where Tennessee has only won by 1 score or less. And when I say a score, I mean winning a touchdown. That's a stark contrast to Georgia. Georgia is, I think we have had 1 game that we've won by, I want to say 2 points, 3 points. That was the Missouri game. Georgia had a terrible game. And so I would say that would be the difference between one of the games of Tennessee and one of the games of Georgia. Wasn't good, no doubt about it. But at the end of the day, that gap in points matters. It's how well can your defense do versus how well can your offense do. Now, Tennessee has absolutely the number 1 scoring offense in the country. We don't disagree on that. That's what the stats say. We all agree on that. Georgia has somewhere around the number 4, depending on which stat you look at. Now, that having been said, you've got to take into account the points per game that are being allowed. Tennessee is somewhere around 81st. I tried looking up the exact stat line, and some places will say 80, some say 81, some say 51. Just depends on what you're looking at. But here's what you really need to look at. The points per game that are given up. Tennessee has given up all season 168 points. Georgia has given up exactly half at 84. So you have very similar offense. There's like 1 or 2 points difference per game versus Georgia's offense and Tennessee's offense. So you would say they're pretty evenly matched. But when you look at the defense, you can see that Georgia forces its opponents to give up a lot fewer points. Well, then you start getting into who have they played? Well, Georgia has played against some of the best in the country right now, considering that one of those is Oregon. Oregon is 7-1 with their only loss being to Georgia. They're averaging 40-plus points a game. They put up 3 against Georgia. Samford, which not a traditional Power 5 school, is first in their conference with their only loss being to Georgia, and they either got shut out or scored 0. So Georgia is a very, very stingy team when it comes to points. If you look across the season, Georgia's had multiple shutouts this season. It's not been easy for anybody to score on Georgia. Now, how is Tennessee going to get after Georgia? Tennessee is very much a second quarter team. This is where they have scored most of their points throughout the season. They get a pretty good momentum going into the second, but they seem to fade late into games. Georgia tends to do just the opposite. It's very stingy on the front end, and then it starts to ramp up as it goes as far as the defensive goes. You have to compare what Georgia does in second quarters versus what Tennessee does in second quarters, because that's where Tennessee tries to really put points on the board. In second quarters this year, Georgia has allowed 3 points, 0 points, 0 points, 10 points, 13 points, 0, 0, and 3. Even if you're the most prolific one in the country, even if you put up 13 or 14 points in the second quarter, you've still got to consider that you haven't been able to really stop anyone else's offense. This will be the highest powered offense you've seen all season. Georgia's probably going to do pretty well. Georgia's going to be looking on offense to play more methodically. You're not going to see a Georgia team who wants to come out here and really get into a shootout with Tennessee. They're not interested in that. Tennessee likes to run fast. They like to play fast. They like to throw fast. They like to score fast. Georgia, in these bigger games, tends to want to slow the game down. Georgia's perfectly happy winning a game like this 26-18, like they were doing in the national championship, versus trying to make this a 52-49 game, which is what ended up with Alabama. Back to Alabama for a second. If Alabama plays just 10% better in that game, they easily win. Georgia will likely be able to match that performance and play better without 17 penalties. Georgia is a very clean team. They have very few penalties. They're one of the fewest penalized teams in the country, and it's going to be a home field advantage. Noise is going to be super loud, which is probably going to contribute to Tennessee having a few penalties of their own, false starts, miscommunication, possibly delay of games. It's going to be tough. One of the things Georgia and Tennessee both have to prepare for is Tennessee's running game. Tennessee has an outstanding running game. A lot of people don't know that. If you go back and look at some of Kirby Smart's press conferences, he admits that Tennessee has an outstanding running game. By Kirby Smart admitting that Tennessee has an outstanding running game, that means that he's preparing for it. So it's very likely to see that Tennessee might struggle to run the ball. Nobody has been able to run for an excessive amount of yards on Georgia since Kirby Smart's tenure. I don't think Tennessee is going to be able to run the ball against Georgia. I don't know how well Georgia is going to be able to run the ball against Tennessee. The thing that Tennessee has to deal with that no one has found a solution for is Georgia's tight end room. Georgia has the most prolific tight end room in all of college football. It's not even close. Even Gary Danielson, which most of us really don't like listening to, Gary Danielson basically says that Brock Bowers is a supersized wide receiver. He's very tall. He's very large. He's very fast. He's very athletic. He has great hands. He runs great routes. I don't know that anybody's going to be able to stop him. Even when he's been double teamed, this guy is a phenomenal talent. Georgia has been multiple times in games where they have turned the ball over 3 times in 2 different games, and they still won by 17 points and 22 points respectively. Georgia absolutely is going to be able to move the ball against Tennessee. The question is Tennessee going to be able to move the ball against Georgia? I don't know that that's the case. There's also been some conversation and talk about how Georgia may have an advantage because whenever you watch Tennessee play against Georgia, you got to see every single card in Tennessee's deck. They had to do everything they could to beat Alabama. That's going to be on display for Georgia to study in tape, and Georgia's going to study it. There is their best wide receiver. Where is it at here? I do have notes. I promise you I have notes. Jalen Hyatt. Georgia is going to be looking to slow down and stop Jalen Hyatt as much as possible. Georgia is not going to give him the opportunity to catch 5 touchdowns in a game. They already know that he's a lethal weapon and that he can catch. Now, Georgia does have some problems in the defensive back room area, but on the whole, in my opinion, Georgia's defensive back and cornerback room is vastly better than Tennessee's. So Georgia is going to be missing some key players. I think Nolan Smith's going to be out. I think he's got a torn pec muscle, so he's not going to be able to play, and he is a leader on that team. Georgia's going to have to overcome that loss of experience and leadership. Are they going to be able to do it? Most likely. Georgia is stacked with 5-star talent. Tennessee has a lot of talent on the field, but Georgia is much deeper. Now, when Tennessee fans are going to jump up and down and say, well, Alabama was deep too. Absolutely, Alabama's deep with talent. There is no doubt. But that's not what was hurting. That's not what was hurting Alabama. What was hurting Alabama was them extending drives for Tennessee. Georgia's not going to do that. If you go back and look at the number of drives that were extended because of Alabama's penalties, or offensive drives that were ended for Alabama because of penalties, you will find that game took a big turn in direction. So to me, when I look at that game, I really say, in my opinion, that Alabama had the worst game that they have had that I can remember in history when it comes to penalties and how bad it hurt them. Getting a false start here and there don't really hurt you that bad if it doesn't stop your drive. But if you get them back to back to back and it backs you up to the goal line, and then you've got Bryce Young running for his life to avoid his safety, those penalties are absolutely momentum breakers. And that's what was happening in the Alabama game. I don't believe that's going to happen in Georgia. I believe Georgia will be able to contain that very well. This will be a real litmus test for Tennessee's quarterback, and we're going to see what would happen. Now let's get into some of the conspiracy theory stuff before it ever starts. If Georgia beats Tennessee, you will see fans that will be saying that was the smartest thing for Tennessee to do because now they don't have to play in the SEC championship. I don't know about that. And they say, well, that happened to Alabama a few years ago where they lost to Auburn and they didn't play in the SEC championship, and then Georgia beat Auburn, and then Alabama goes to the playoffs and wins the national title. Yes, that happened, but I wouldn't want to count on that. I wouldn't want to not be in charge of my own destiny. So it's going to be interesting. On top of that, let me back up a little bit. Josh Heupel, want to give this guy credit. He's doing an outstanding job at Tennessee. He's really doing a good job of getting this program turned around. Are we seeing a 2019 LSU? I don't know. Maybe. Are we seeing probably one of the most prolific quarterbacks in all of college football? I don't know. Maybe. Are we seeing one of the most prolific defenses we've ever seen in all of college football out of Tennessee? No. They looked pretty good against Kentucky. I'm not going to lie. Some of their guys were flying around the field. They were hyped up. Are they going to have a little bit of a hangover? How worried are those players going to be playing against Georgia? They're going to be playing in an extremely hostile environment. I would love to see the decibel meter at Sanford Stadium when this game is played. I have tried everything I can, guys, to come up with reasons to how and the way that Tennessee might win this game. But here's essentially what it's going to boil down to. Georgia's going to look to slow this game down. I'm sure Kirby Smart has already had correspondence with the referees stating that he wants it known that if Tennessee substitutes, that Georgia wants the time to substitute. They want to be able to take their time and substitute as well. Georgia's going to look to disrupt their speed, slow their program down, and they're not going to be extending their drives with stupid penalties. It's not going to happen. Georgia's likely been focusing all week on stopping the turnover situation. You're likely going to see a Georgia team that is very disciplined. And unless Josh Heupel rewrites his entire playbook, Georgia's going to have it pretty well scouted. You give Georgia enough time to scout you, it's going to be trouble. I think that when Alabama played, Alabama did a great job of scouting them. It's just the penalties killed them. That's really what it is. Georgia is going to slow it down. They're going to run the ball as best they can. They're going to open up the run game, and then you got to figure out a way to stop Georgia's tight ends, and nobody's done it so far. Ladd McConkey catches a few passes. This game can get away in a hurry. It's going to be loud. It's going to be violent. It's going to be awesome. That having been said, if you want to know my prediction, I'm going to go ahead and tell you like this. It's going to come down to Georgia breaking up their drives and slowing it down. I don't think you're going to see Tennessee be able to slow Georgia down. I think what you're going to see is that Georgia is going to be looking to slow Tennessee down. I'm going to give Tennessee a little bit of credit here, and I'm going to tell you that I'm going to give Georgia a little bit of credit here. I think Georgia's offense is going to do what Georgia's offense always does. I do think Tennessee is going to get some points, but I also think that you're going to look at the reason Georgia's not going to score as many points as they normally do is because they're going to be interested in slowing Tennessee down. That having been said, I think that you're going to see a final score of Georgia 31, Tennessee 20. I think that it's just going to be the speed of the game that matters. Georgia's not interested in getting into a shootout. They're going to grind it to a halt. So I'd love to get your predictions down below. While you're down there, hit that like and subscribe button. It's just my opinion. It's not a guaranteed fact. I can understand if you disagree. But if you're going to jump down there and disagree, do me a favor. Tell me what I got wrong. Tell me where I went wrong. Tell me what stat or fact I missed that overcomes the facts that I've given so far. Don't just say I'm an idiot and Georgia's going to lose and all this other stuff. I need some statistical data because opinions don't mean nothing on a field. All right, guys. Well, thank you guys so much for tuning in. Don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and share. We'll see you guys soon. And hopefully soon we'll have an upcoming guest you guys won't believe. Have a great day. God bless. Go Dogs.